All right, so we're live on YouTube. So this is Commissioner Jones. I serve as the chairman for the Strategic and Operation Planning Committee. First thing I want to do is, in this committee structure, one of the members actually is now the chairman of Chatham Area Transit, and that's nobody other than Mr. Disha Cody. So I just want to make sure we acknowledge that as the introductory piece into the meeting. Appreciate you for stepping up and going into that role, Mr. Cody. And I appreciate whatever you're gonna bring to the organization. I already know that you are hard at it and working toward making sure we do what we need to do, brother. So I thank you again.
Thank you.
All right.
Look forward to it.
And my other thing is, Ms. Molden, just to make sure that Commissioner Stone did get this meeting announcement, correct?
Yes, she did.
Okay, cool. Well, that being stated, we're going ahead and move on with our meeting. Did she say anything as far as not coming to the meeting or not being in the meeting or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right.
Beverly, did you get a?
And I'm not calling the tracker down or anything like that. I'm just making sure there wasn't no information out there on it.
Right. We will follow up this morning just to be sure that there are no issues.
All right. The other thing is in the packet, as far as Strategic Operation and Planning Committee, in our packet, it did. I saw it in the other two committees, but it didn't have that PowerPoint slide. So I did see it in the other two committees report, but I didn't see the PowerPoint slide. But I mean, it's cool. I got to see it. I just want to make sure Cody or anybody else who didn't see it, if you looked at the other committee reports, it was in there.
We apologize.
Right. Oh, no problem. The meeting is called to order. We're going to have our first committee presentation, financial service assessment from the consulting group, and I'm turning it over to you, Ms. Malden. You can do your introductions.
Okay. As you all are aware, we have taken a really, really hard look at our financial picture. And as a part of that, we actually invited our sister organization at JTA to come in and have their financial team take a look at our processes and how we have things aligned here at Chatham Area Transit, and to make recommendations regarding industry best practices, things that they have discovered to be best practices in their own right. And so to help us take yet one step closer to being that model agency all across the country and really the world even. So we have been fortunate to have been working with Ms. Keisha Dukes, who is the Area Vice President of Finance with the Jacksonville Transit Authority. And so we have been very, very happy to have her in as a part of our team. She has come in and she has worked with the finance staff. She has worked with the executive team. She was an integral part of our planning efforts when we came back to the board initially with our findings with regards to our financial situation. So this is just the next step in that deep dive that I committed to the board that we would take in terms of what we need to do to turn around our finances, to strengthen the ability of our financial services team to serve our organization. We felt like this was so important that we actually asked her to present her report findings to all of the committees so that the board members will have the opportunity to hear directly from her prior to the big board meeting. After her presentation today, there will be a comprehensive report that'll be emailed out to the entire board, but we really wanted everyone to just focus on what she was saying and give her the benefit of your attention, and then layer that with the full report so that you can circle back around with any questions or concerns that you may have. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Dukes.
Good morning. Thank you. Hope you guys all had an enjoyable 3-day weekend. I'm going to pull up the presentation and get started. Can everyone see the screen? Okay, great. Again, my name is Keisha Dukes. I am the Assistant Vice President of Finance for JTA, and I am very excited to present this financial assessment. I do appreciate the opportunity to be able to come in and assist. So I'll start up with the scope and methodology that we utilize. The scope of this assignment was to develop and implement a short and long-term financial strategies and an assessment on the overall financial health of CAT. So the first thing that I did was I interviewed finance staff. I was on site for a couple days. We reviewed policies and procedures and also financial statements and the financial system. So really in this entire process, even when you get the final report, I want you guys to think about the 3 Ps, which was my focus: people, process, and product. Understanding that you have to have the right people in place, meaning the right people in the right positions and also with the right skills. Because at times it can be a chance to train the staff that you already have. But having the right people in place do tend to lead to having the correct processes in place, meaning, are we operating efficiently? Are we as effective as we need to be? And are our processes that are in place, are they helping us to kind of block and tackle from the unforeseen, such as instability in our financial records or budgeting issues? So once you have the right people in place, they help to create the correct processes, and then you get a better product. And in terms of finance, by product, I'm meaning financial statements, your budget documents, any of those items that are coming out of the finance department. And you want to make sure those documents are accurate. And you also want to make sure you have a certain level of transparency so that everyone is clear, from CAT staff members all the way up to the board. Everyone should be clear on where CAT is financially. And so with the people, again, I was happy to visit Savannah. I am originally from Georgia, so it was nice to come back to Savannah to visit. Interviewed the finance staff August 24th through the 25th. You can see who I talked to there: the interim CFO, the senior accountant, the payroll accountant, and the AP specialist. And I kind of put out to the side kind of how they are organized right now. We had very good conversation. They walked me through the process of all of the things that they do on a day-to-day basis. I had a chance to see the systems from what they worked within. They were able to tell me some of their pain points, things that they would like to change if they could. And so it was a very good conversation that I had with the finance team. Processes. Again, I reviewed the accounting policies and procedures. I, again, watched the staff as they perform tasks within their Muni system. I've observed board meetings and other staff meetings. And I reviewed prior external audit reports. All of those things are necessary to kind of get a handle on our current situation and where you are currently. Product, again, review the financial statements, the budget documents, and the board financial packets. So after I review all of these items and talk to staff, I created a report, which Ms. Malden alluded to earlier on, that will be shared with you guys later, but I wanted to share some of the key findings from that report. So I tried to break these up into, again, people, processes, and product. If we look at people, the lack of transfer of knowledge from the CFO to other finance department staff. It seems that the prior CFO handled the majority of the tasks for the finance team, and a lot of that knowledge wasn't transferred to other members of the team. So the recommendation there, of course, is to create work instructions, a clear succession plan, and implement cross-training. And also hire a really strong CFO immediately. Also, with that lack of transfer of knowledge, which I didn't put here, you also want to be concerned from an audit perspective whenever a CFO or someone higher up is doing all of the work and not spreading the work among the team. You typically want to look at things to see if there were any fraud, any cases of fraud committed, because usually when people hold things that close to the vest, it's for a reason. So I am recommending as well that there is a complete fraud review conducted with the help of JTA. The small size of the department doesn't allow for proper segregation of duties. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in some cases. Because the size of the department is small, you can anticipate having some segregation of duty issues. but I want to make sure that there are not some things that are just an absolute no-no. For example, having someone that has the ability to set up a vendor in the system, receive the items into the system, and then also cut the checks, because which means a person could potentially set themselves up as a vendor or a fictitious organization as a vendor, receive in the product or not receive in the product, and then pay themselves. So you want to make sure that those things don't exist, which is why I've recommended a segregation of duties matrix, which will clearly show if there are conflicts and talk about how we're mitigating those conflicts. For processes, lack of complete defined policies and procedures. While there were documentation on policies and procedures, they were not always complete, and there were some that were missing. So my suggestion here, of course, is to update the current accounting policies and procedures and to add additional policies and procedures that would be helpful from a best practice standpoint for your accounting department. Right now, all of your vendors are being paid via check, which is very inefficient. Paying all vendors via check could lead to a 60% increase in overall costs. So you want to try to set up as many vendors as possible on ACH. That will also make this process within the accounting department more efficient. Lack of financial stability. Given the reason that one of the reasons that you guys reached out to JTA was because of the financial stability issue. And that is one that you don't want to take lightly. So again, I think what Ms. Malden has been doing, which is immediately assessing the current financial situation, coming up with a plan to increase financial stability, and allowing JTA, as I said, to conduct a fraud review to ensure that there was nothing going on that shouldn't have been, that may have contributed to the lack of financial stability. Another issue, may not go after all the potential grants available. And looking at the grants funding, it seemed like you guys may not be getting all of the grants or applying for all of the grants that are out there for you. So the suggestion here is, of course, create a position dedicated to grants administration, and then align this position to work with JTA's grant manager to assist in helping set this process up for you guys. And that goes with the financial stability, because of course, as much funding as you get in, the better. That will also help with your financial stability piece. Products, again, Munis is a financial system that you guys utilize, but it does not produce financial statements. Your financial statements are currently being created manually by hand. And anytime you have a manual process, that increases the chances of errors. So you want to ensure that you find, first of all, can Munis actually produce a financial statement? Determine that. And if not, can you guys find a system that can work alongside Munis to create a financial statement? You do not want your finance team creating these statements within an Excel document. It just, again, leads to more errors. And then lack of financial transparency. I believe that the board documents and financial data that you just received in the last board meeting should be continued moving forward. Want to make sure you guys are given regular updates on the financial status of the company. I know there was some question about the accrual basis versus cash basis and how the numbers were presented to you. It is very, very important that you guys always have a clear understanding of where you are financially. And so I believe that continuing with the level of reporting that is started, continuing with that type level of reporting, and maybe meeting at a more frequent pace to only discuss financial information may be very helpful and beneficial in creating that transparency. Because again, the lack of financial transparency can also lead to increased cases of fraud or misunderstandings. And another item I think that maybe I didn't put on here would be your budgetary needs and changes are not identified.
Ms. Dukes, I want to interrupt you for just a quick second. We're allowing one of our commissioners to call in.
Okay.
Give me about 2 minutes. We're going to get her in and get her on the line, because I know that she'll especially want to hear some of this. So
okay.
give me 2 minutes. I apologize sincerely for having to do this.
No worries.
Hold on for just a moment. And then I may get you to, when she gets on, to start with the key observations,
Okay.
please. All right, thank you. I apologize, and I apologize to the other committee members.
Ms. Dukes,
Yes.
this is Commissioner Jones. While we're waiting on her to come on in, could you can you give me some conversation there as far as I heard you said it was unilateral decisions being made throughout the organization or throughout the finance department. Are there going to be recommendations as far as checks and balances? I mean, it may be a new term for it now, but are there going to be anything in reference to checks and balances as far as the organization is concerned, as far as recommendations?
Yes, so that comes along with the policies and procedures that we are recommending that are created that will create the
Okay.
checks and balances. Or kind of in the audit world, you kind of refer to that as your set of internal controls, which are the things that you
Helen
have.
Stone.
Join the meeting.
Um, and so those checks and balances, and part of the checks and balances is that segregation of duties matrix that I talked about earlier.
Mhm.
That again shows what should be done, what shouldn't be done, but also we'll talk about the communication with and to the board members and other members of management as far as finance is concerned.
Thank you, Ms. Dukes. Now, as Ms. Malden recommended, I just heard that Helen Stone has joined the meeting. If we can go back to the beginning as far as key observations and recommendations, because that's pretty much all we really did so far, that way we'll all be abreast as far as board members are concerned.
Okay.
Thank you.
So again, these key observation and recommendations, these are certainly not all of the observations and recommendations, but just the key ones that I thought you guys should be aware of. And again, I divided these into people, processes, and products, which at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about how important it is to have the correct people in place to create the right processes and end up with a great product in the end. So with people, the lack of transfer of knowledge from the CFO to other finance department staff. It seemed that the prior CFO did a lot of the work herself, did not share that work with other members of the finance staff. So upon her departure, it kind of left the finance staff in a bit with a bit of an issue in that a lot of them didn't know the day-to-day things that she did or were not privy to the day-to-day things that she did. And so immediately need to create work instructions, a clear succession plan, and implement cross-training. And definitely need to hire a strong CFO immediately. Also with this, typically, if a CFO or another high-level executive is keeping a lot of the work close to the breast, then you usually want to look for fraud or if there has been any cases of fraud. So I'm also recommending that there is a complete fraud review done just to ensure that everything was on the up and up. The small size of the department does not allow for proper segregation of duties. Usually in an organization with a small department, you are going to have segregation of duty issues, but you just want to make sure that those major things are properly segregated, i.e. vendor setup from check cutting. You want to make sure those two things are separate because the last thing you want to have is to have someone have the ability to set up a fake organization and then pay themselves. With processes, lack of complete and defined policies and procedures. There are some current accounting policies and procedures, but in some cases they are not complete or they need to be shored up to be stronger policies and procedures. Also, based off best practices, I will have identified some policies and procedures that need to be created. All vendors are paid via check. Paying all your vendors via check is very inefficient and can add up to 60% of processing costs. to what you do. So you want to make sure that all of your vendors, as many as possible, are set up on ACH, which will make this process a lot more efficient. The lack of financial stability, of course, which is part of the reason that I'm giving this presentation, is because of the lack of financial stability. I think, again, what Ms. Malden has done is immediately started to assess the current financial situation, develop a plan to increase financial stability, and then, again, like I mentioned earlier, allow JTI to conduct a fraud review to ensure that fraud is not one of the reasons for the financial instability. It seems when looking at your grants and your grant funding, you may not be going after all of the potential grants that are out there and available for your use, which again will lead to increased financial stability with the more funding that you get in from your federal sources. The recommendation there is to create a position that's dedicated to grants administration, and then align this position to work with JTA's grant manager to kind of assist in setting up this area at CAT. With product, the current financial system is Munis, and it does not print out financial statements. The financial statements are currently done manually in Excel. They're created in Excel, which is highly inefficient. And anytime you have a manual process that increases the chance for errors. So you want to determine if this capability is available within Munis, and if it's not, then you want to determine if there is a system that can work in conjunction with Munis so that you can get these reports printed automatically versus someone manually creating your financial statements. And then lack of financial transparency. You want to make sure that all of your financial data is transparent and is clear, from the staff members all the way up to your board members. Make sure that the financial data reflects the accrual-based accounting versus cash basis, because again, like I believe it's been explained before, if you're only looking at cash basis, you're getting a very different picture than if you're looking at the accrual-based accounting. And you should be providing the board with regular updates on the financial position so that everyone is always fully aware of where we stand as an organization. And so those were the key observations and recommendations from the report, and I'll wait and ask for questions. Steps forward, I think, heavily utilize the knowledge of JTI in the areas where there may be some weaknesses, i.e. performing the fraud review, ensuring audit findings have been properly mitigated. When asked, this was another area that the CFO did in the past, which was making sure the audit findings were cleared up. I couldn't find a document, no one could provide a document that showed how the corrective actions were put into place. And certainly you don't want to have a repeat audit finding. Assisting the new grant administrator, assisting with recommendations to the transit asset management plan, and streamlining the financial process. And I think we should provide regular updates and status of recommendations. And that really is the report. The final report is much longer and more in depth, but I will stop speaking and wait for any questions.
All right, can you put the screen where it's a dual screen where I can see people if they're asking questions?
I can try.
Or if you hand it over to Beverly.
Yep.
Or Beverly.
Yes, sir. Commissioner, you may have to just change your view from your screen. Do you see it at the top, right?
It does not give me the option. That's why it does not give me the option to change my view, because it's locked. It says the locked in view for the screen.
For the screen, okay.
Yeah.
Is there something I should click? Because we use WebEx, we don't use this version. So I can stop sharing my screen. Let's see if that helps.
We can do that. Okay.
That works. I appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Dukes. So at this time, and I don't see my two board members. I know Helen is on the phone. Helen, do you have anything that you want to add to this conversation? And basically, and that's on my fault for not prompting Ms. Dukes. Ms. Dukes was given she comes from JTA, and she was given an option to basically give us some kind of financial viewpoint of what we have going on within our transit system. I know that you heard some points, and I know it might have not been, put in a conversation where you understood where she started from, but do you have any questions, or do we need to answer anything right away? And I'm talking to you, Commissioner Stone. Is Commissioner Stone on the line still?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I hear you. Yes, ma'am, I hear you.
Okay. I would like if I could receive an electronic version of this so that I can look over it. At this point in time, of course, to everyone on this call, all of our concern is the financial stability of Chatham Area Transit. So, you know, like I said, I'm coming in on the end of this, so
Yes.
or in the middle of it. So I'm trying to. My understanding of what you're trying to accomplish here is to take a deep dive into where we are financially and what we need to do to stabilize ourselves.
Commissioner
Yes, ma'am.
Stone? Oh,
Go ahead.
Yes.
Commissioner Stone, this is Bakara Malden. Yes, it is to stabilize us, but it's to also make sure that we're utilizing the best accepted practices financially to ensure that we really don't get back to this place again. We want to make sure that we have internal controls in place so that, you know, when you receive financial information from our team, from the staff, we want to make sure that you as board members, you as a commissioner, one of our stakeholders, that you all are confident in the information that you are getting from us as an agency. We're working to raise our credibility with you as a board member, as a commissioner, as well as with the community. And this is a big part of it.
Okay. Because obviously, and this is no deep, dark secret, this isn't the first time that board members have been in the dark as far as the finances for Chatham Area Transit. I mean, we went through this with a former director, and now we're going through it with the departure of the CFO. So certainly we've got to do something going forward for transparency with this organization. It's getting to where I don't even know what's going on. I mean, what's up or what's down, and that's not good from a board member's perspective.
Okay.
I agree, and I apologize. Having sat in the seat as a board member before, earlier in my career, I completely understand your concern, which is why it was very important to get the right team of consultants and financial experts around us. JTI, of course, is a leg of JTA, the transit agency, and what better entity to have come in and advise us with regard to best practices and financial standing than another transit agency that, to be quite honest, has had to rebuild in a very way that's very similar to what we're having to do. And so, which is why we felt that this agency would be a great agency to come in and advise us in terms of industry practices and standards. We believe that if we're able to put these recommendations in place, the board going forward prayerfully will not be in the position that they've been in prior. While I wish I could go back and undo any impressions or anything that happened in the past. What I'm committed to doing is just making sure that going forward, you can trust the information that is coming from me and anyone as a part of this administration.
I understand. I mean, certainly that was not directed at you. What I'm saying is that this board has found themselves in this position more than once. And that's just unbelievable to me.
All right. All right. Chairman Cody, do you have anything you want to lend to this, brother?
Yes, I want to ask a question. On the fraud review, what exactly does that entail?
Okay. So So typically, you want to start out with looking at, for example, your list of vendors, how those vendors are added. You want to verify that all of the vendors on that list are valid vendors. Also want to look at the spending of each vendor. Then we would also look at the financial statements and do a full review of just a sample of those financial statements, making sure that the numbers and everything kind of ticks and ties and makes sense. You also want to look at, also bump that up against the check register to see who's been paid, how often they've been paid. Are there anything that stands out? Usually it's not going to be a gigantic number. It's usually small bites. So it may be a check of 500 here and a check of 1,000 there, but it just typically you're looking for patterns. And with the relatively small size of the agency, I think it's something that can be done rather quickly. But it's really getting into all of the things, i.e. the financial statements, looking at the line of credit where that was spent, but really digging into all of those items and really getting underneath it to understand where the numbers are and let you guys have a little bit more confidence in your financial statements. If we say we looked at a sample of 5 out of the last 6 months and we were able to tick and tie every number. And what I mean by tick and tie is I'm looking at the assets number and I was able to follow that through back to the system. And I can tell you for sure, if you guys say you have $15,000 in assets, I verify that you have $15,000 in assets. So it's kind of like resetting your table to say, okay, now as of this date, everything is correct and in order, and let's move forward from there.
Ms. Dukes, to piggyback off of Chairman Cody's question, how far back do you suggest we go?
I would go back at least usually the last 3 to 5 years. Just to be sure, you want to check. You don't want it to be too recent, and you don't want to go back too far.
I got you. Yes, ma'am. All right, Cody. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to put a timeline to it. You have anything else you want to add to it, sir?
On the 60% for the vendors that's paid in checks, you say up to 60% we can save some funds by not doing the check system. How would that work?
So then you would set everyone up as an ACH vendor, meaning they would get paid electronically instead of us cutting a check. I think when you cut a check, you don't think about the paper, the postage, the envelopes, the manual time that it takes to process the payment. This way it would just automatically be like, if, for example, my paychecks are set up to electronically hit my bank account. So I don't have to worry about getting an actual paper check. So it would work in the same way. The vendors would just get paid electronically versus getting a paper check.
All right, thank you.
And piggyback off that question for our chairman, how long does it take for a system like that to be, I guess, agency-wide to be implemented?
It should be a relatively quick process given the number of checks that are processed on a weekly basis. I think you guys process anywhere between 45 to 80 checks a week. It shouldn't be that cumbersome of a process.
And then you say that 40 to 85, that doesn't include payroll. Would payroll checks be implemented into that kind of system or something like that? Or would that be something different from a different system perspective?
I wasn't looking at it from the payroll perspective. I was looking at it from the vendor perspective only.
Okay, I got you. All right. As far as the ARC system is concerned, how hard or do we have software recommendations that we actually industry standards as far as concerned?
Yeah, and so Munis is the first time was the first time I've seen that actual system. Typically people use Oracle or AS400 or some
I've heard
other
Oracle.
So with this one, I think it's just going to take a bit of research. If Munis does not allow the capability to print financial reports, certainly I believe that we could talk to someone from that organization that could give us some other companies, other softwares that could work in conjunction with and to allow us to print out automatic financial statements.
And my last question is, what led you to, I guess, with most of the things that say urgent or higher standard, what led you to some of these decisions? What led you to most of these, I guess, recommendations and risk statements?
So on my risk statements, those are all based off of when you look at the impact and the probability, which will be in that greater report. So it's how likely this is to occur, the probability, and the impact is how will it affect us versus financially from a project cost perspective. So you look at it in that way. So anything that I thought had a high probability of happening or would be a high impact, those things were labeled urgent. If it was going to have a high impact and a medium probability, those were ranked as high. And so urgent really means these are things that are probably happening right now, and we need to get in front of it and put things into place to fix it. High means that there's a great chance that it's about to occur. So
Okay, and then go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, and so that's how those rankings are determined.
So with that being stated, I guess my biggest question is, because from a board perspective, I accept whatever report is brought before me, and I'm accepting that report as for the good of the order, for the organization. And I'm never expecting, I've never called out anybody for fraud or whatever case may be. I prefer to even say there was a mistake before I would even say it was fraud. Now, whatever the truth is, the truth is. I'm not going to turn a blind eye if fraud exists. But with that being said, how do we as board members create a finite system that we can see everything without having to dig into without me having to say, Bakari, I need to see every single transaction that comes through here, every single thing, because we as board members, we just want to see the bottom line that we're green, we're either green or black. We're not in the red. And if we're in the red, what can we do to get out of the red? Those are the finite things we want to see as board members. If we're in the green or in the black, we want to know if we're in the black, we don't know what we can do to get out of the black as well. But as an organization, I have to put trust in my CFO, my CEO, my COO, and all my chiefs to give me the best information, the best tools so we can move our agency forward. How, and my thing is, and maybe this is not the question, I'm not answering the answer today, Mr. But how do I, as a board chair or board member, understand that what can I do to ensure that I'm getting the finite numbers?
And I think really that I would say that you need to have a person that's dedicated to audit on your staff, even if it's one person. And that person would be the person that would be independent from any of the other chiefs that would ideally have a dotted line to the board and report to Ms. Malden. And then would be the checks and balances that would go in and periodically all throughout the year check to ensure that the controls and things that we're setting up now are in place and working, and that you don't end up back in the same situation a year or two from now. But what you just described really perfectly would be an internal audit person, a person dedicated just auditing the organization, every day. And I think that's what really benefited JTA, was having an internal audit staff. Not only does that help with the financial areas, it also helps with all of the external audits, like from FTA, running the FTA triennials, keeping up with all the external audit findings and corrective actions, and ensuring that people are actually putting those things into place and that they're working. And have that person report to the board on a periodic basis about where they are, what findings are still out there, what issues are still hanging out there. Also, with the position that was created at JTA, the board was able to also ask for special projects. So if there was something that's bothering you that you don't quite understand, you may want that audit person to go and investigate so that you can get a clear understanding of the process.
Okay. All right, and is that in the recommendations? I'm not necessarily recommendation, but is that in the finite report though? The final report? Okay.
It is.
Okay. I apologize for you hitting on spot on those questions, but I just, those are the things that my mind actually thinks about. I think that we have a lot of good staff members. I think a lot of times, and this is just me for public record to make sure I say this, I think a lot of times we take on things harder than what we could, and because we understand we get at a certain salary level, we refuse to go out there and ask for help. And I think a lot of times these things happen. And I've seen it in previous organizations where I work for. I've seen it in previous organizations where I actually been board chair for. A lot of times we get caught up and we're trying to provide a service, but we don't want people to think that we can't provide the service. So we just Jimmy rig, fix it, whatever case may be, and get along to go along. And as long as we can escape the narrative, we just keep moving forward. And I think a lot of times I don't want to always put the escape mode on. It's always fraud. Just sometimes it's just I'm in over my head and I just don't know how to ask for help. And so with that being said, I appreciate you, Ms. Dukes, for doing this presentation. I look forward, Ms. McCary, to get the full presentation to the entire board so we can make sure everybody understands this piece right here. I know it's going to be a lot of color conversation behind it because it always is, because it's a sensitive nature to some board members. So with that being said, I will close out that unless you have anything else you want to add to it, Ms. Malden.
Jay, I actually have something.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Commissioner Stone.
It is my understanding through, I guess, being on the commission for a while, but basically we put our faith in our CEO. That's who we hire and fire.
I agree.
The CEO really is the one that controls every other department head. And if he or she has reservations, then that's when it needs to come to the board. I think that if you don't keep that system in place and board members are going around getting into department heads' business,
I agree.
it can be chaotic. So I want to be very, very clear in that it's my understanding that we hire and fire the CEO. She hires and fires every department head. And if she doesn't have the confidence in the CFO, then it is her responsibility and duty to deal with that, but also to inform us. So I want to be careful that we don't get into the minutia of areas that we don't need to be in, because that can often just open Pandora's box for a lot of trouble.
All right. I totally concur with you. And as far as per Robert Rules of Order and everything like that, there's only one employee of us, the board, and that is the CEO, whoever that person is.
Right.
So I totally concur with you as far as that concerned. Did I mislead or say anything in reference to against that statement?
I'm just saying,
okay.
It's just important to me that we keep a system in place and everybody knows how that system is supposed to work.
Yes,
because, you know, not necessarily on this board, but on other boards that I've served on, where you've got 4 or 5 board members running to different department heads, and, you know, everybody's getting a different story and something ain't right. So it's just, I think that we put a lot of faith in our CEO.
Yes, ma'am.
And, you know, it is their job to manage the organization.
Yes, ma'am. I totally agree with you. I make it a point not to speak to too many people outside of Ms. Molden because I understand. Well, I'll speak to Beverly because Beverly is the executive assistant. So, I mean, outside of her and Ms. Molden, I try to make it a point. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that we need to keep that structure in place. However, I also agree to piggyback off what you said statement-wise, we as a board, when we see inefficiencies within our organization, we need to make sure we challenge whoever the CEO is and say, y'all need to put a handle on that and fix that as soon as possible. And a lot of times we turn a blind eye as board members and we don't hold the CEO accountable in holding the CEO accountable over the organization. And then we come into these traps and these problems that we have persistent that we're talking about today.
And Jay, that'll bring me to another point that I would
Yes,
like this board to consider, and I was not successful on other boards, but once a year, there really should be a review of our CEO. It helps the CEO, it helps us. And then in other organizations where I've served, not only do we do an evaluation, but we ask the CEO to do an evaluation of themselves.
Yeah.
And it is an extremely helpful tool as far as keeping lines of communication open, strengths and weaknesses, the financial security of the organization. It opens up good dialogue, very constructive.
And Commissioner Stone, not to belabor the conversation, Ms. Bakara Mulder, when we interviewed her and we talked to her, and she has been vehemently about making sure that we give her her pros and cons, her goods and bads, and make sure that we move an agency forward as far as, so I can only speak on the current one at this time, but she has made sure she stated, please tell me what I need to work on. Please tell me what I do good, what I do bad. So she has, I'm going to go to the bat and say she has been on me hard about that. And I've been on our new incoming chairman to make sure that he understands that she wants to be the best transit agency CEO in the world. So in order to do that, you have to make sure that you're communicating with your leadership and your bosses. And and my thing is, I think that what we need to do is we all need to have those conversations with her individually and collectively, because we all understand what we want out of her, but sometimes we all wait on the collective action. But I think individual action is just as important as collective.
Right.
All right.
Got it.
Thank you. I appreciate your commentary. I'm going to go ahead and move forward because I want to make sure we stay on task. Operations planning update. Do we have any updates?
We do not at this time.
Okay, thank you. And
Well,
budget planning, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. I forgot. There has been a development that I do need to let you know, is that we're going to shift the conversation from service reduction to more of an optimization posture. After we initially put out that we were thinking in terms of service reduction, mostly financially driven, it forced us to take a hard look at our operational efficiency. I'll say Commissioner Stone, other board members have reached out to me consistently about our coverage on certain routes, namely the number 14, as well as some others. And so that has forced us to go more into an optimization posture as opposed to a reduction posture. And there have been several, we've kind of put together a timeline, and I will have this in a demonstrative form during my report during the board meeting, but just want to call your attention to a couple of things. We are looking at, we're still looking at the Holiday Plus option. However, we are putting a whole lot more service on the number 14, as well as some other routes that have been identified by the union. As you know, we keep a very open relationship with the union. And after I've raised the issue with the 14, our union leadership came back to us and said, hey, there's some other routes that we need to give attention to beside the 14. They submitted those routes to us because honestly, operators are having to be our eyes and ears. We're not deploying staff onto our buses right now because our seating capacity is very limited and we don't want to take seats away from customers that need those spaces. So we're having to rely on our operators to be our eyes and ears in terms of what's working and what's not working on our routes. And so we are putting more service in those routes that need the additional capacity. We are deploying what we call hot buses internally, which is simply just putting additional buses in motion on those routes in order to make sure that we're not passing our customers by, because we want to make sure that we have pretty respectable ridership throughout the country compared to other agencies. So we definitely don't want to undermine our efforts to do that. And so just a quick timeline, we're expecting our safety barriers to be in place by October 26th. And we are actually expecting to implement the service modifications, which will include the Holiday Plus, as well as the recommendation, or our recommendation to temporarily suspend Sunday service effective November 1st. We are also planning during the October meeting to come back with a request to reinstate fares November 1st as well, based on us being able to have those protective barriers in place. And that will also provide us some relief as far as the bottom line is concerned. So again, 10/26, barriers in place. November 1st, route optimization model goes into effect, as well as we're recommending that fares be reinstated. And like I said, I'll have more of a demonstrative timeline for you to look at for your consumption for the board meeting. Mr. Dumas and I have just recently met actually this morning to finalize these dates. And so we'll have something in a form that you can digest following this meeting.
All right, thank you. Budget planning, anything with budget planning?
In similar form, we will have a timeline for you for the budget amendment. We are going to be scheduling some work sessions internally as well as with the board. I think everyone knows that we're going to have to amend the budget in short form, but we will be submitting that information to you all shortly as well.
All right, thank you. All right, on to proposed agenda items for September 22nd. Line items A and B will continue to be on there until COVID-19 is out of our area, out of our premise. So I'm going to skip those two. As far as line items C through G, any explanation? We have anybody ready to give any kind of conversation to those items? The first item is equal employment opportunity policy.
Good morning,
right.
Chairman Jones. Yeah, so the EEO policy is just an update of the current policy we've had. This is part of the ongoing effort to basically update, revise all CAT policies and get them before the board for approval. It's kind of a new system where all policies are approved by the board. So we're on to EEO at this point. The plan is to have them to you at some point, you being the entire board.
I got you, brother.
Point this week so that you can review them ahead of time, kind of like what we did with last board meeting.
All right, so David, let me go ahead and help you out, brother. So, okay, I want to make sure we're clear, because you're going to have a board member or two that's going to ask for these things. So when we do it, make sure we, I guess, redline it. She wants it where it's redlined and all other good stuff like that. And I'm talking about Commissioner Odell. You know she's going to ask for it where it's redlined. And I don't care how we do it, as long as it shows what we're removing or what we're adding and it's highlighted in whatever fashion form. But she's going to prefer it where it's redlined, and she's the only one who actually asked for a preference. So I just think we stick to the narrative of making sure we redline the items. If we're taking something out, redline it. If we're adding something, make sure we highlight what we're adding. And that's the only request I got, David. I'm making real simple, plain. Because if you don't do it, then you know at the meeting we're going to have a whole conversation about why isn't it redlined or whatever the case may be.
Can we go ahead, because at one point we were doing a like a log and then it changed to, can we just, you think just red line is fine?
Yes, I think red line is fine. But
Okay.
What I would do is on the meeting that Commissioner Odell is in, I would ask her, and I'm not trying to call her out. She's the only person who asked for a preference of how it should be reviewed.
Okay.
And no one else has commented on how it should be reviewed. So if I can read it red line, you can delete it. I don't care how it's done. And most board members aren't really privy to that. But she wants a specific form, which format can be used for everybody. So I just think we stick to that format. That way, everybody on the board is covered.
Okay, that's understood.
All right. Thank you, brother. All right. Any other commentary to that? Director Cody or Director Stone, y'all have anything to add to that?
No.
No.
Okay, thank you. Moving to the next thing, compliance program policy. Compliance program policy.
So this is basically the foundational document for the compliance program at CAT. Now, this is going to be a whole new cloth document. There hasn't been a per se compliance program at CAT. So this is the kind of start of a program that's going to fall up under administrative services under me. So
Okay.
this outlines the start of the program. So it's basically an entirely new document. And part of the compliance program is the compliance hotline that we got underway, and it kind of outlines some of that stuff. So this will actually be a whole brand new kind of policy, program.
All right, so would it be in a brand new policy program? What I would make the suggestion of is you give us a reading on it this month. And then I'm gonna make and I so happen to have the chair in my group, so I'm gonna make the recommendation to the chair that we read it this month. We don't actually take action on it in the agenda for the meeting. And then next month's committee meeting, after we have read it and we get confirmation that everybody's read it, we put that in October's meeting. Since it's something that's brand new, give it 2 months where we can actually go through it. But it's very important that we get it out to the board this month, so we can go ahead and hash out any differences we have. And then we make sure we put it on the policy as far as for next month's agenda. Anything new, that's how I would suggest we do anything new, unless it's something that's very, very important or something that's actually needed right away. And that what that would do is give you a level of comfort. It gives us as a board member a level of comfort to make sure we had 2 months to read some kind of policy that's brand new.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I'll make note of that.
And see, we do it in the county, but the difference in the county is we have 2 meetings per month. So it's different in the county where we have 2 meetings per month, where here we only have 1 meeting per month. So that'd be my point right there. All right. Business Code of Conduct policy, Business Code of Conduct policy.
So this is another rewrite and update to an existing policy. So we'll make sure to put that in the preferred format so that you know what changes have occurred.
Okay. All right. Is there anything specific that we're trying to re-highlight or rehash out within that you kind of saw?
No, actually, the Code of Business Conduct was in fairly good shape. I mean, it hasn't been touched since 2014. So the overall idea behind the kind of policies now is to touch them every year, just to make sure they're up to date. And so I think a lot of the business code was more just putting it in the right format that the board approved through the process policy, is to kind of make sure it's in the right look. But the meat of the code was actually in pretty good order. So there's not a ton of substantial changes there.
And to play devil's advocate, to what Ms. Dukes was talking about earlier today, is there any language that's tied into that whole stuff, I guess, with the check writing policies and is any of that language that needs to be added so we're not double dipping? So we're not passing something out and then we got to come back and pass it again. Some of that language that she's talked about earlier in some of those policies, could some of that be tied into that conversation?
I mean, mostly the code deals with things like you're expected to have honesty, integrity, not commit fraud. It's a violation to do X, Y, Z. And certainly, writing a check to yourself would be a violation of the code. The code pretty much establishes like it's called the Code of Business Conduct and Ethics. So it's saying that the expectation of CAT for its employees and its board members and vendors is that there's going to be honesty. They're going to report things that they see. It provides things like reference to the hotline and reaching out to your compliant, to your manager or HR if you see things that are not correct. And so then it also kind of goes through kind of the ethical decision making, like does this feel good in your gut? Would you want your family, if they could, know about it, to know about this decision? So it's more broad, and it doesn't necessarily get down to departmental level checks and balances, though a violation of a departmental level checks and balances would most likely come up to the level of a violation of the Code of Business Conduct. So it's typically, and this is how I've seen it at other organizations, it's more of a broad global, we expect you to be compliant, we expect you to be ethical, we expect you to comply with law. And if you don't, that's a violation of this code. Or if you see someone else or something else that is wrong, you have an obligation or a duty to kind of report that so that we can kind of correct it.
And it might be off cusp. Anything dealing with, I guess, nuances of new technology, email, social media, any kind of things like that, would that be touched into this conversation or be in a different policy?
I think it's touched on this, but there is actually coming down the pipeline a social media policy. I double check on the actual code. I'm mixing it with the other ones, but I do think it touches on it in a paragraph about basically you can't go, putting cat's business out there on your social media page and that kind of stuff. Also, there's things like confidentiality and, how you behave as a representative of CAD in the community. That kind of thing is all kind of tied into the code of business conduct.
All right. Thank you, David. I ain't gonna hit you up no more questions. I'll just call Dr. Malden and have her get in contact with you if I got anything else for you, brother.
Okay.
But I do want to make sure that we, as Ms. Duke spoke of earlier, we talked about potential fraud, not necessarily saying we have fraud, but potential fraud. And if this is going to be tied to to this conversation, I want to make sure that we look at the nuances of that. I know you did say that we want to get in the habit of doing this annually, which I'm 100% sure. I think what we could do if we want to do it annually, Ms. Malden, because I won't be here after December, but what I would make a suggestion is do it quarterly and then come up with 10, 15 policies. I divide the policies up into 4 quadrants and then do it quarterly. Therefore, you're making sure you're identifying, you touch all the policies in our organization. I think how we're doing it now this time is actually smart because what we're doing is we're just going through the book and trying to figure it out and try to do it before the end of the year. So I commend y'all for doing that. Commissioner Stone or Cody, do y'all have anything to add to the conversation or ask questions? I didn't ask on either one of the last 2 items.
I'm good.
Okay.
Just
Director
one,
Cody,
do
Chairman
we
Cody?
have a copy of this business code of conduct?
You will have, the old one is out there and you could get that, but you will have a copy of the proposed revised code with a red line essentially of what changes are being made from the old one. So you could effectively see the difference between the current code, I'll call it, and then the proposed revised code.
And Cody, to back him what he just asked, I got the policy manual, I got the budget manual, I got all those sitting in my front seat in my car, and I've been riding around with it for the last 2 days. I plan on finding you to give you all this information, so therefore you'll have everything I got. Because
All right, I appreciate it.
you're gonna need it a lot more than I do moving forward. So,
Yes, indeed.
all right. Well, we don't have anything else. The next piece is RFP issuance for IT service.
So this is just a request to allow us to be able to issue an RFP for IT services that we basically deem are needed at this point. The idea being that we are cognizant of the IT service agreement being done November 30th. So we want to just be able to get permission to go be able to issue an RFP with that kind of deadline in mind.
Okay. And the last thing is media relations policy.
So this is again, an update to a current policy. This actually, the update was done by our systems development chief, Patricia Harris-Moorhead. And so what we'll do is just make sure the board has the red line, or we'll confirm what they want for that, what you all want for that, and then just make sure you have the red line of this update.
All right. And I see Patricia's on here. Patricia, do you have anything to add to that?
No, sir, other than the old policy in 2014 was very brief. Basically, it contained 2 paragraphs. And so the update that the team and I worked on is probably now about 2 pages. I plan to discuss the policy at our committee meeting later this afternoon. I have gotten feedback from our CEO and our Chief of Administrative Services requesting a change, and so we will make that change. But I'll discuss it at committee and ask Ms. Odell what her preference is regarding the 2014 version and the updated. But they're very different since the 2014 was only 2 paragraphs.
And it's the same question I asked David earlier, Mr. Stearns earlier. Social media is totally different 6 years later. So is that going to be tied into this conversation?
I'm thinking, as Mr. Stearns was thinking, Commissioner Jones, that really a social media policy needs to be separate because,
Okay,
as
I got
you are aware, it has changed. And the team and I also talked about possibly including it in the media relations policy, and we made a determination. We really probably should make it separate
Okay.
because we will want to get best practices from around the country from other transit systems too, because that is a really too complicated strategy and policy for social media. So a lot of people will need to review, give us input. But what we want to bring you regarding a social media policy is probably, like a best practices position that comes to us from APTA members and things like that.
Only reason why I asked the question is because in today's society, people are getting more news from social media than they're getting from the media now. And so that's the reason why, and I just know the trend is going to continue growing in that effort and that energy. So I hear what you're saying, but I understand that we want to make sure that we tie those two strongly together, that we don't miss any kind of nuances between those two kind of conversations.
Yes, sir. And we'll have to be very detailed, take our time with that one because it's complicated, but you're absolutely correct. Traditional media and social media are so important depending on the demographics of how people get their information.
And I do want to take our time in building it, but I also want to make sure we get something out there, because if we don't get something out there, we're held liable as long as not having any kind of thing out there, even on social media.
Right. I believe, Mr. Stearns, there's something out there now, but again, it needs to be updated. I believe when I arrived 2.5 years ago, I saw something out there about a social media policy, but it needs to be updated.
Well, can y'all send me both the media and the social media today, so I can look at both of them today, and so I can give my commentary to the governance meeting next week, because when we discuss this topic, I want to make sure that I have the nuances of what we need to be discussing when we talk about this media policy. Sure,
I can make the change that was requested of me of the media policy, and I'll have to do additional research on that social media policy because I'm like 65% certain I saw it out there on the S drive, but that was years ago. But I'll do the research.
Well, if we have anything out there, I need to see it and know it. Especially if it's in the policy book. I mean, I want to make sure we know what it is as far as.
Sure.
I think social media is where we're going to lose any kind of effort. We're good now because everybody's concentrated on government politics now. But next year, when everything gets boring, that's when we need to really make sure that we have that conversation in reference to that. All right, and then I'll bring up more color to this in the governance meeting next week. It's next week, right? Governance meeting next week. All right. Mr. Cody or Ms. Stone, do y'all have anything you want to add to that?
I'm good.
No, thank you.
All right. Then we're moving into old business and new business. Do we have anything we want to add to old business and new business?
No, sir.
All right. And our next set meeting is right there. It's right in my face. Governance meeting, which is next week, Tuesday, September the 15th. And then September 22nd is our board meeting. And I will be praying for Mr. Cody because that'll be his first board meeting as the chair. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to call out sick. I promise you. So I'll be there in support for you, brother, to make sure your first board meeting is set. I do want to remind everybody that we are going to a consent agenda. We went to consent agenda last month. It worked out well for us. With the consent agenda, I also want to make sure we add the points of minutes. The minutes can be put into the consent agenda as well. And so what that would do is that would streamline and make it very easy for Mr. Cody to be able to go through what we need to do. But in order for the consent agenda to work, we have to give it to the board members at least 7 days prior, all those items that will be voted on the consent agenda, so we can have questions, ask all those things prior to governance meeting, right after governance meeting, I should say. So it is important for us to make sure we have this information to all the board members. And it's important that we put out the time where they can ask questions. And so we can make that consent agenda flow and make our meeting system flow as well. And that's pretty much it for me in a nutshell. For the good of the order, is anything else that needs to be added? All right, going once, going twice. All right. Well, if anything being added to the the agenda meeting for the day. I call for this meeting at 11:41 to be adjourned. I thank y'all for all taking the time to be a part of this meeting. And I appreciate you, Ms. Dukes, for giving us such good report. And I'm looking forward to the full report as well. Thank y'all.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all also.